chimps are like that when you're studying them in the forest. You hear tree drums. The chimps at night will drum on trees and go, and so the local guys, the Izande or whoever you're working with, the Benzeli, they know how to hone in and locate where those chimps are in the morning. Elephants can be a little unpredictable, but I always worry about like people driving along the highway here in the USA, talking on their cell phone. Like that's a danger I won't have when I'm in the forest.
At what point did we go our separate ways in the evolutionary track between we chimps and bonobos?
Chimpanzees and bonobos split from each other, genetically speaking, something between 1 and 2 million years ago, I think is the figure.
Okay. Was that at the same time we also splitted from them?
No, we split from them something like 9 million years ago.
So later on after that, they did the split and then we...
Yeah, chimps and bonobos kept along the same line for another 6 or 7 million years, and they only split very recently. In fact, if you look at... It's kind of hard to distinguish between a chimp and a bonobo. Obviously, we humans look quite different. there's no we walk on 2 legs, we have these giant brains. Sure. Bonobos and chimps look really similar to each other. Yeah. There are subtle differences. Bonobos, for instance, chimps are born with white faces and they turn black as they grow older. Bonobos are black from the start. They have ruby red lips. They have pink around their lips and their eyelids. They're actually quite pretty, and they have these parted hair in the middle. But see, that's a very subtle difference. Chimps and bonobos, you could easily mistake one for the other, whereas we humans, and even a gorilla looks quite different from a chimp, right? So the more evolutionary time that passes, the more divergent two populations will become. Chimps and bonobos still, they drum on trees. They both use tools quite well in captivity, although bonobos, for some reason, don't use a lot of tools in the wild. We don't know why. It's one of the big mysteries that we're looking at.
What about safety?
Safety in the field?
Of researchers in the field. And
well, that's part of the fun of it. People worry about me when I go to Africa, and I understand why. There are hippos that walk by our campsite every night, and crocodiles in the river, and elephants can be a little unpredictable. But I always worry about like people driving along the highway here in the USA, talking on their cell phone. Like that's a danger I won't have when I'm in the forest. I have to take medicine against malaria. As you well know, there's all these tropical diseases that can be damaging. But sometimes people, I think, worry a lot about these field trips because they don't know. They don't, they're unfamiliar dangers, which can be more frightening. But there are also dangers here. COVID, for instance, the whole world was infected with a pandemic. So it's not. There's this image of Africa as like the heart of darkness, which I want to challenge that because Joseph Conrad. He meant the heart of darkness not to represent Africa, but how colonialists were acting in Africa, how white people were coming in and killing Africans. He didn't mean that Africa itself was the heart of darkness, but it's often misinterpreted as, what is it like to travel into the heart of darkness? No, I like to call tropical Africa the heart of light, because to me it's just so full of color and community and diversity and even human cultural diversity, and it's just a beautiful place. So yes, it's dangerous, but I think we should have a little danger in this world. It shouldn't all be so neat and orderly. That in itself is a danger.
Of course, and it's something many persons don't get to really look at, particularly Conrad, as you talked about. I'm working on a couple of stuff, like I told you the last time, about his life and the books he's written down there. I'm shooting also in the district that is the street named after him in Poland. It's Josefa Konrada, so it's like Polish, so it's like the avenue I get to use in running the documentary and all that. So it's trying to capture Heart of Darkness for what it is from the European perspective, from the depiction of Africa and the people down there, and the conversations from Chinua Achebe and in and about these persons down there.
I would wake up in the morning to a multi-hominid species drum concert. So from the swamps, I'd hear the chimps and gorillas, because they were kind of hiding out in the swamps from the loggers that were nearby. And the chimps, they would be they'd be drumming on trees. The gorillas would actually be drumming on their chest. And then to the north, you would hear another third kind of hominid species going like this. You know who they were, right?
Yeah.
Us.
So
human drums. That
so
church
it's like, yeah.
ceremony,
So it's like it's like a convolution of like a whole lot of stuff from we humans down there in and about religion and all that, and
Yeah.
then these other guys, the chimps, and then the gorillas on the other side, and then you probably waking. Is that like your alarm or something like that?
And that was my alarm for about a year there when I was lucky enough to live in a forest with both chimps and gorillas and humans living up not too far away, the people of Grima.
Hello everyone, my name is Biringkpa. I am the host of the podcast Boring Conversations. Today I had the pleasure of talking with Dr. Cliff Hicks. Dr. Cliff is an American primatologist, a professor working extensively in Central Africa, and he's been able to give us a full-length interview into his practice, into his research areas for the past 3 decades and counting. And we talked about a whole lot of conversations about the preserving of our ecosystem, our shared ancestry with bonobos and our shared ancestries with chimps, down also to gorillas, and how we ordinarily should be humbled as to how we go about using the environment, how we go about commercializing things, as opposed to living in peace with the environment and living in peace with the way we get to do things. I am here in his home, and the conversation is quite important. It's quite thrilling. It's something you want to go look out for. We were able to talk about how chimps get to operate, how they get to build their nest, how they get to show their nomadic skills, and how they get to pick up skills, and how they get to live and be in peace and in harmony with the environment, and how they get used to humans to a large extent. That term has been called habituation, and it's not habituation in a restricted sense whereby barricades and stuff like that are placed to limit their patrol and their movement. No, it's habituation as far as them being comfortable around humans. We were also able to talk about their security, but not just the security of animals now, but the security of also humans who get to go into these research areas. It's something very fascinating as to how certain men and women just, come up with this idea and see to it that the world has people that ordinarily will speak up for them as to preserving a whole lot of stuff down there. These animals and these organisms are endangered species, not in the sense of we talking about endangered species in modern times. They're endangered because, like you get to find out in our conversations, the ways in which they get to transfer their traits and the ways in which they get to transfer the things they do is in and about a term we ordinarily would come to get from the idea of the meme. Not still the idea of meme as we now know it in popular culture, whereby you get to see guys get to share this mimetic way of looking at life, but also memes as archetypes that we ordinarily can come to identify in our world, as they also get to identify in their own world. And from there we looked at conversations as to how they get to live in this forest and how they get to go about living with chimps and living with other animals, and from elephants to leopards to other animals that they get to find far away from what you want to call modern day civilization, covered by canopies of trees dating back to thousands and thousands of years. And they bring us this research, and it goes a long way to show us the idea of evolution, the idea of Charles Darwin talking about give me more time and I'll give you evolution, give me more time and I'll give you a pattern as to how these things get to work. And looking at these themes and looking at these concerns is also a call for us to look at the broader picture of what we are not looking at. He's also researched in DRC. He's had some ties with Goma, and Goma is at the heart of the current conflict at the moment in in DRC, and there's been a call out for volunteers. There's been a call out for supporting the projects that go on down there in cash and in kind, particularly in cash at the moment, because as we know it, we humans are not so intelligent because we still go about killing ourselves and doing so many harmful things to ourselves. You also get to learn about how communications is done down there, because it's not communications as to what we get to know at the moment. Internet connections get cut off at a point. The coverage doesn't get so deep into the forest. Down to my right, away from the kitchen, Sonia is preparing different dry cell batteries for Cliff to get to take alongside with him, and we are still going to get a couple of other batteries for the cameras he will need for what you can call his second missionary journey. Is something he has been doing a whole lot, and the conversation goes on and on and on. If you've not subscribed to this channel, please do share this with your loved ones, and let's keep these conversations going. Let's save the wildlife we have. Let's conserve as much as we do, because if we don't do this, we would just cut down all the trees, and just like the Mexican proverb will go, by the time you finish cutting down all the trees to print money, you won't end up eating this money because you need food. We can have currencies in other things as opposed to having cash. So enough with capitalism, enough with the whole idea of commercialization. And what do I have to say? Welcome to Boring Conversations. On the episode today, I am pleased to have Professor Cliff Hicks, and he's an American primatologist who has found his way to Africa and has been there for more than 2 decades and researching and doing a whole lot of stuff down there. He has come to research a whole lot. He has looked into different conversations and different research concerns and projects in and about the area known today as Central Africa, and then he's found his way also to the Democratic Republic of Congo, and has looked into primates in and about Zimbabwe and conversations in and about that region. And we are here today to have some conversation. Cliff is about to catch a flight to
tomorrow
to what people generally tend to call Africa. Not Africa here as a country, Africa as a continent, and then he will find his way back to the jungle. He has been a bit free from the jungle, and then, like he said himself, it's like a light hanging in the air in and about him going back to ordinarily understand how the jungle life get to function. And how's that been for you, Cliff?
So it's always kind of a contrast between the sort of big city life here, in which I quite like, but and the sort of holy grail for me, which is the tropical forests of Central Africa. And so I'm very eager to go back, but always transitioning between those two worlds is quite a bit of a challenge. It's a lot of paperwork and packing. My wife is helping me so much organizing that for the trip.
Thanks to Sonia.
Now. Exactly. Thank you, Sonia. We're so getting ready to fly out tomorrow, and it's always just a big shift between the two worlds. In about 5 days, I'll be in the middle of the tropical forest, and moist tropical forest where the chimpanzees live. And right now, I'm in this big city with all this paperwork and all these packing. So yeah, it's a shift, but it's a shift I'm ready to make. And fortunately, I have a lot of help from my friends and my wife, and so it's going well.
Before we get into the conversation, you're from America. At what point did this idea of jungle life come into you? Is it something you got in and about the Amazon jungle down there? It's some fascination you got from Nat Geo Wild?
Well, when I was a kid, my mom and dad moved us out into the countryside when I was quite young and turned us loose to play in the woods around our house. It was just a wonderful childhood. I remember one time when we moved to the new neighborhood, I saw a snake in the tree, and we would see vultures stalking around an abandoned old barn. One time, my brother and we actually took a vulture egg back home to show to my mom. We were very young, and my mom wisely said, "Now, boys, that vulture is going to actually probably reject that egg if you hold on to it. So take it back now as soon as possible and put it back in the nest where you got it from. And we did so immediately. And I never forgot that. Like, it's good to observe nature, but you don't have to mess around with it. And so I learned a lot from my mom and dad about science and wildlife and nature. But I always, the further away from civilization I get, to me, the more interesting things are. Civilization, of course, is quite interesting as well, but it's something we take for granted. But when you're living in a tropical rainforest, you realize there's an entire community. There are humans involved, Benzeli people, for instance, with whom I've worked, but also all sorts of other species, from chimpanzees and gorillas to plant life to it's a community of species, and that's something that we've impoverished in today's world. We have a few bird species around here, a few limited number of trees, but when you're in a rainforest, you realize that we not only have our human communities that we share in, we have living communities, and it's just a great way to immerse yourself in that.
Wow. You've been a fellow at the Max Planck Institute.
Indeed, I was a invited researcher there for almost 10 years in the department of Christoph Busch, and that's where I kind of learned the tricks of the trade from there.
So how does life in the jungle look like?
Well, it kind of depends, because there's a lot of different kinds of so-called jungle. There's tropical rainforest, like old growth tropical rainforest, and chimpanzees live there, and that's beautiful. It's like a cathedral above your heads. The canopy is very high. Little light sometimes reaches the forest floor, so it can be quite dark. So actually, sometimes I come out of the forest quite pale. But actually, where I'm going now in Central African Republic, it's actually further north in Africa, which, as you know, the further north you go in Africa, away from the forest, it gets more towards the Sahel, it gets more sandy, it gets more dry. So this area I'm working at, called Chinko, it's just north of Bilio, where I worked before. It's actually a mix of savanna and gallery forest alongside rivers. The chimps live in the gallery forest. That's where they nest and they feed, but they travel across the savannas sometimes. So actually, you come out of the forest overhang and you come out into the savanna, and you're baked by the heat. And it's actually a really cool place, because it's not pure forest, it's not pure savanna. You have like elephants, you have buffalo from the savanna side, but you also have chimpanzees, and you have pangolins and things from the forest, and they're all kind of meeting. And by the way, this is probably where our own ancestors first evolved, was in this sort of ecotone between forest and savanna. And for me, who's very interested in human evolution, in addition to studying chimpanzees, this is a sort of an amazing place to work.
Chimps have been like the closest in and about when you're talking about primates and ancestors that we can trace ourselves back if we were to look at evolution. Stuff like that. In your TED talk, you had talked about the cultures in which chimps get to build that we ordinarily are not thinking. 8 years ago, you had talked about the idea of chimps getting almost to the Stone Age. Are they evolving beyond that now? Or they're still in and about that?
Yes, indeed. So chimpanzees are, together with bonobos, our closest living relatives. They split from us something like 7 to 8 million years ago. And then bonobos and chimps split from each other about 1 million years ago.
Sure.
So just like if you really want to understand, let's say you want to understand the origins of your own language, English, it really helps to study, say, German and to study French, because a lot of our vocabulary comes from French. It gives you a fuller understanding of your own language. Same with our fellow species. If you want to understand what it is to be human, you want to understand our closest relatives, which include chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, and other primates. And so, in particular, chimpanzees are great because they have a very developed material culture, hence the Stone Age you're talking about. Bonobos, for some reason, which are equally related to us, they lack much of a material culture so far. But chimpanzees, they have, all across Africa, they use sticks to acquire honey and to insects in the ground. They use leaves as napkins or as cups. And there's one particular population in West Africa. These are the Stone Age chimps that you're talking about. Now, the chimps I've studied don't use stone tools, even though there's plenty of stones there and there's plenty of nuts to crack open. They just never invented that, apparently. But in West Africa, some chimpanzee genius, some Einstein of chimps, maybe 4,000 years ago at least, invented this technology that has then continued on for generation after generation across a wide area of West Africa.
You talked about a set of skills they get to pick as they get to go and as they get to move on and live their life. Do they do this consciously?
Chimpanzees, in terms of transmit the skills.
Yeah. Like we mean evolutionary in terms of natural selections and conversations like that.
Well, chimpanzees like us, there probably has not been natural selection acting on them to become better cultural beings.
Yeah,
Because chimpanzees are dependent on culture much as we are. Now, we may be more dependent on culture. The only way you and me are able to survive here, we're more tropical creatures, huh? Yeah. We grew up closer to the equator. Certainly, I've worked a lot in Africa. Yeah. And living here through the winter, it's quite hard for any Homo sapiens. And so what we need is clothes. How do we get clothes? We learn how to make clothes before factories existed. We actually learned to make clothes from our parents. And so we're dependent on that. And chimpanzees are also dependent on their culture, probably not to the same degree we are, but they need tools in order to access hard to reach foods and things like this. So natural selection has probably crafted both chimpanzees and humans as highly cultural beings. In terms of, is there intentional transmission of culture? Well, we humans definitely do that. When we go to school, like when I'm a professor at the university, I know that I'm an evangelical teacher, so to speak. I know that there is information lacking in some of my students' head about, say, what is a primate or what are the features of a primate. So I'm going to put that information in their heads. And if someone's teaching quantum physics, they would need to put that information in my head because I sure don't have it. Right? Now, so we have intentional teaching, but did you know that for many hunter-gatherer cultures, although there is intentional teaching in hunter-gatherer cultures, the majority of teaching is more you just follow your father or mother around, or your uncle or whatever, and you watch what they're doing.
From observation.
Yeah. And so it's active learning, or maybe a scaffolding in terms of teaching. Christoph Busch did a lot of research on this. We think that chimpanzees, although it seems like active teaching, such as we have in our classrooms, is rare or absent in chimps, as far as we know, that there may be a lot of sort of passive teaching and active learning. So passive teaching is another word for that is scaffolding, which is, for instance, a mother chimp leaves her favorite stone right here in next to a bunch of nuts, and she puts the nuts there and then turns her kid loose on it, and the kid starts playing around. This is scaffolding behavior. And this is what hunter-gatherers do a lot as well, although hunter-gatherers add to that a lot of active teaching.
Sure.
So that may be, in a sense, sort of intentional shaping of the infant's behavior to learn the traditions of the chimpanzee society to that degree. But they don't have like classes. I would love this, but they don't have a chimpanzee teacher sitting there saying, okay, this is how you swing from a vine, this is how you climb a tree. They don't seem to have that. But then again, most humans don't either, or do much of that.
Yeah. You talked about the idea of we having like kind of this elitist idea as it concerns monopoly to culture and monopoly to development. We humans, and then we tend to push in and about all other animals to their own space, and then we want to tell ourselves we are the apex of civilization and evolution and stuff like that. What really gives humans this tendency to want to exclude intelligence and all that from other animals and then leave it exclusively to us humans? That's
an excellent question, Abina. This is something that I pretty much spend my life sort of battling against, in a way, not physically battling, but in terms of intellectual. It's exceptionalism. I'm really against this kind of exceptionalism that we humans tend to want to grant ourselves, whether that's male exceptionalism. Men are the ones that sit around and do all these things, and women just bring the coffee over or whatever. No, women also have an equal part in everything we do. I'm against cultural exceptionalism. For instance, my own culture, America, is that shining beacon on the hill. No, I'm against that. I don't think any one culture is better than any other. Each culture may have particular gifts that come out. America certainly has produced a lot of great literature, for instance. I'm not so keen on all the military stuff that's come out of America. But we can take good things from cultures without saying one is better than the other. Well, I also think that should apply to our non-human cousins as well, even plants and other organisms. Why do we say, for instance, if you have a dog and there's a murder, and the murderer has left their handkerchief at the scene of the crime, and you present that handkerchief to the dog, the police use dogs to track down the culprit and things. Their sense of smell is hugely better than ours.
And we don't have that.
Yeah, we're lacking it. So dogs are geniuses in the world of smell. We are just completely backwards, right? So if you're looking at smell, dogs rule. Maybe we do math better than most dogs that I know. So, we have our own gifts as well. But let's take the good from the dogs and the good from the humans and the good from the chimps and celebrate all of it, instead of saying, we humans are on a higher plane than everything else. Chimpanzees are really good at living in the moment. Matsuzawa, a researcher, has shown that chimpanzees are actually really good at speed counting, for instance. They may be even better than humans at that, at least in terms of laboratory experience with chimpanzees. Chimpanzees may be really good at taking the information from the moment and putting it together into a complex sense of what's going on in the world, maybe even surpassing us. We're really good storytellers. Chimps, I think, can also tell stories in a sense.
Is it in their own way? Or?
In their own way, maybe through their displays, or I think we've only scratched the surface of that. I don't rule out that chimps can't also tell stories in a certain way, probably not with spoken language. I mean, definitely not with spoken language. But we humans, we can definitely say we are storytelling creatures. We build whole religions, we build whole visions of the world. That's something we do pretty well. But we shouldn't say that that's the only, that there's an old expression. If elephants were the scientists, then they would cite the trunk as the pinnacle of all creation. I mean, the trunk is a beautiful organ,
of course,
flexible and sensitive. So from an elephant's perspective, the thing with the best trunk is the most evolved. Well, we have these huge brains that, maybe are similar in size to, say, orca brains. There's other species with very large brains as well. We can be proud of that, sure, but it's not the only thing that doesn't mean we're more intelligent than other species. It just means we're different. Different isn't deficient,
Of course. Many persons put up the argument about we being able to build a civilization, we've been able to build houses and then invent stuff, and then they look about the primates and other animals as to be deficient in that standpoint, and then use that as a yardstick to say we are like superior to them.
Yeah, but I mean, we humans do that to other humans as well.
Yeah.
Like we look down on hunter-gatherers. Well, we used to look down on hunter-gatherers as, these primitive people, they don't even have any cities and they don't have the internet. How terrible. But I mean, look, if you actually go and I've been lucky enough to work with hunter-gatherers, they live with a real light footprint on the planet. They have rich and complex life just as much as ours. They have stories and songs and in my opinion, they live a life more grounded in sort of like where humans actually spent most of our time evolving. We're the kind of freaky society that's trying something new, fair enough, but we're also kind of messing up the world. Look at what's happening to our environment. Look at all the wars we're fighting. Look at all the destruction we're doing. So this idea that we're superior, certainly there are some nice things that have come out of civilization. I just enjoyed my coffee. We can travel. You and I can meet, even though we come from different continents because of air travel and all these things. Sure. There's benefits. There's I don't want to trash our civilization that we built, but at the same time, it doesn't make it better. Then I'm very much against sort of missionaries going and saying, oh, you have to accept this way of life or that way. Why don't you go and learn from their way of life? And they can learn from our way of life. We all have something to teach each other.
Sure. And it's so sad you get to see people peddle these stories and then they sell this narrative in and about the point you pointed out about, hunter-gatherers, and people tend to look at this life as a life less human to live than the one we have at the moment. Europe 40, 50 years ago wasn't the way it is at the moment, and it's also evolving and things are getting to change, but people still continue to peddle these stories in and about the way they get to do.
There's even prejudice in Central Africa from the non-hunter-gatherers towards the hunter-gatherers, and they even call them monkeys sometimes, but I've been lucky enough again to work with hunter-gatherers, and a fellow scientist, Diane Duran, she described the Benzele, is the group I worked with. For the Benzele, it's like the animals are wearing paint on their feet. They're able to read the forest floor and tell when the animals pass by. They're the scientists in this case. I remember one case, Benzele, a field assistant, taught me like how he knows a gorilla passed across this clearing, say 4 hours ago. He would say, well, look, the gorilla passed here obviously after the rain. You can see it's in the mud, the prints, and you can see the gorilla stepped on a plant. And then when he stepped on the plant went like this. Yeah. And then the plant slowly starts to right itself. And they've studied plants enough to know if it's up like this, that was like, say, 2 hours ago. If it's up like this, it's like 3 hours. They are geniuses. In fact, without them, we would have had no gorilla project. And in fact, without the people I work with in Central Africa right now, we would have no project. So, this whole snobbery, put an IT guy in the middle of the rainforest and they would probably starve to death within a few days. but granted, the IT guy is doing some pretty cool stuff as well.
Of course.
So it's not to say that there's anything wrong with the IT guy or me, but it's just to say we should celebrate what every different human cultural group has to offer to the world, and not look down on them.
Yeah. It's also, I was reading Jeffrey. He wrote Paths to Glory. I think Alan Jeffrey was talking about the first man that made it to the peak of the highest mountain.
Mount Everest.
Mount Everest. So he was writing the story that ordinarily led to that, and he also talked about the locals that ordinarily get to lead them throughout the peak and the different ways in which they get to take down there, because they don't do the stuff themselves. They are probably from the so-called developed world, and then they move down to the Himalayas, but they are guys indigenous to the place that know the terrain very well, that gets to lead them throughout all the peaks, and you get to see how most of them get to die. But then when the story is being told of those who conquered stuff and all that, you get to see that it's a conversation born out of the guy who first reached the peak without the locals being called in question.
You only hear about that person and not the locals that built him or her up to get there. Yeah,
it's also like in the movies, the hidden figures about the women that did calculations.
I know that movie. It's a great movie.
For Apollo 11. And
ignored by history, except finally in that movie they get their credit. Yeah,
sure,
I know what you mean.
How do they transfer this knowledge from one generation to the next?
You're talking about the local people?
Yeah, the local people down there.
Well, I've actually, the Benzeli, for instance, don't have their own writing system. I mean, some of them can write now, but they write in sort of French letters. But through song, through story, through just wisdom that's transmitted verbally down through the generations, which, you know, it's amazing. It's just this knowledge. It's not written anywhere. It just stays within the population through, you know, through legend, through stories, through myths, through just instruction. It's quite interesting to study that. And it's getting more and more rare now that everybody has their cell phone, including in Africa now. And so when I first went to Central Africa 25 years ago, 30 years ago, there was no cell phones. There was very little connectivity with the sort of outside world. You'd have people who didn't know who the Beatles were, or most of them had heard of Jesus. But you know, there was a real sort of, now everything's coming together because people have their little cell phones across the world. But yeah, I'm really interested in how these knowledge systems, and that's actually why I study chimps. Not that their cultures are any more like hunter-gatherers than ours are, but just chimps obviously also don't have writing. So how do they pass their knowledge down through the generations? And that's what we're working on right now.
So more or less, is it stuff born out of evolution? Because if you look at someone like Richard Dawkins, he talks about the ancestry down there. He talks about the whole idea of the selfish gene and all that. Do they transfer more of their culture and their lived experience through evolutionary processes, or they get to do it more or less that the baby chimps get to observe their mothers and their parents and then learn from them and then also transfer it to their children? How does it really work?
Yeah, so it's actually, I actually use one of Richard Dawkins' terms. I know what you mean. Memes. He invented the term memes in The Selfish Gene, which is
archetypes and memes.
which is a secondary secondary way of transmitting information down through time. Another replicator, the second replicator on the planet after genes. And I actually am talking now about using chimpanzees, using the study of comparison of chimpanzees at Bili and Chinko as a way to study the establish a mimetic clock. They talk about a genetic clock. Is there a mimetic clock? And this is sort of an idea I'm investigating. Can we track the degree to which chimpanzee cultures evolve across Africa by studying different populations? So, for instance, we found at Bili, we found ground nesting, we found termite mounds pounded open against roots. We found 4 different kinds of stick tools. Now, this is a little sneak peek at what we found in Chinko. In Chinko, we found something totally different. And I'm not going to tell you what that is yet, but hopefully the paper will be out quite soon and you guys can read about it. And this is, so I should just mention, Chinko and Bili are side by side. Okay. And in fact, the Chinko and Bili chimps, it's a vast population of chimps that has not yet been carved up into subpopulations by human activity yet. It's a laboratory for chimpanzee evolution. They're separated from each other by a large river called the Bomo, which is also the border of CAR and DRC. But they've shared genes fairly recently in evolutionary history. So we were expecting they'd also be making ground nests. They'd be using the same kind of tools, pounding open termite mounds like we found at Bealey. No. What we found is something really different. Now, it's preliminary, so I'm going back tomorrow, in fact, to see if indeed, my first 3 months, if that bears out. But I think what we're looking at is two different chimpanzee behavioral realms on the side of a river. And that's going to help us to understand how cultures evolve, not only in chimpanzees, but potentially in our own hominin ancestors 6 million years ago.
Billy, you talked about the whole idea of it not being like completely known in times before now. So it was looked at maybe some different stuff. What has been the research that has been done into the discovery of Billy in about 8-10 years from now, like in the past? Yeah.
Okay, so Bealey, about 30 years ago, if you looked at maps of known chimp distribution across Africa, if you looked at northern DR Congo, and there was apparently a big gap where there were no chimpanzees found there. Well, in my 2014 paper, I showed that actually the reason there's a gap there is because we haven't looked. Now, local people had looked, and they knew that they knew there were chimps there. There was a conservationist named Carl Lamont who went there and found some signs of some kind of mystery great ape. But if you actually looked at the known chimp distributions there, it looked like there were no chimps there except a small little patch. Well, our surveys, and that's why I called the paper I wrote about it, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. We found enormous numbers of chimps. Tens of thousands of chimps living up there, and by the way, they were not being protected officially. Like there was no conservation activity in that area, so we were kind of losing an opportunity to protect one of the largest continuous populations of chimps on the planet. Now, this population, I think, carries over into the Chinko region. Again, behaviorally, they're quite different, but genetically, they share some similarities. So Chinko and Bealey together represent probably one of our best bets for protecting chimpanzees in the future across the world. What we found, original reports at Bealey were of some kind of mystery ape, some kind of hybrid between a chimp and gorilla. There were these ground nests that Carl Lamont was taking pictures of. But it turns out they were chimps. They weren't gorillas. They weren't this lost subspecies of gorilla that we're all hoping for. But chimps with a very intriguing culture, which is actually I think my main contribution to what we found about them.
We've talked about chimps from a point of view of like an overview of conversations in and about this, but let's take it back. At what point did you like come to this epiphany that I want to be in the jungle. I want to be with the chimps. I'm going to Africa.
Well, okay. That's a good question. It actually started earlier than chimps.
Okay.
And that when I was a kid, my dad would bring home from the Wake County Library, he'd bring home these dinosaur books. And my mom and dad would read to me these dinosaur books, along with things like Tolkien and The Hobbit and things, just got me primed for traveling. But I also loved dinosaurs so much and prehistoric life. Yeah. And I always, in the dinosaur books, I would get a little, like, the closer you got to humans, the more bored I would get, because I saw this big divorce between humans and everything else. And we don't have, now, of course, now we know we do have dinosaurs. Birds are still flying around us. But at the time I didn't know that. I thought, life used to be so much bigger and more interesting, and now it's just kind of boring humans, which, to be honest, is kind of a limited view of humans, right? But so I really wanted to study dinosaurs and prehistoric life. And so I even went to the field with Robert Bacher one time and dug up dinosaur bones. And I really liked it. The only problem is I kind of lack a little bit of the patience to pick away at bones. I really admire people who do that. And I still read avidly about dinosaurs and fossil hominins and things like that. But I actually what I like to do is to learn about our past by studying living species, our close relatives. Now, chimpanzees are not a time machine. They've also been changed quite a bit since our common ancestor with them 8 million years ago or so. But it is true we can learn a lot about ourselves by studying our relatives. And so I remember being in a class with Dr. Wallach. I don't know if Dr. Wallach, you're out there anywhere, but I want to thank you. It sounds like actually a Polish name, but I had a primate class. I was going to be an English major, like my dad and like my brother, in North Carolina State University back in the early 90s. And I took this just on a whim. I took this primatology class with Dr. Wallach. And I remember she told us vividly about meeting baboons in the forest, and I was just really excited to hear that you could actually meet baboons. And then she showed us a Jane Goodall documentary, which I hadn't seen before. And all of a sudden, something shifted in me. Previously, I'd always looked at, like, in the prehistoric life books, when they show like ape ape humans, I would get kind of bored. Okay, here come the humans. Something else is going to happen, and the dinosaurs are gone, the mammoths are gone. But I watched the Jane Goodall's documentation of life at Gombe with the chimpanzees, and all of a sudden, the whole void, the gulf I saw between humans and the rest of life vanished, because I saw chimpanzees doing clever things like Jane Goodall and Hugo van Lawick. They filmed Mike, an adult male chimpanzee. He was very low ranking and not particularly strong. He lived in the Gombe field station in Tanzania. He stole some kerosene cans from Jane Goodall's tent, and then he would run along in the forest, banging them together, bang, 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 making a lot of noise. And just through that impressive display, using tools, granted human stolen tools, he actually rose to the top of the hierarchy. And it just seemed so much like sort of a human crafty thinking strategy. And of course, other species like orcas and dogs and things can think and plan too. But to me, all of a sudden, this huge gulf I saw between my own species and everything else vanished. Chimpanzees stole that from me. But actually, it was a great thing they stole, because now I see humans as just another flourishing twig of the branch of life, and not as sort of the pinnacle of evolution. And I thank chimps for that. And chimps have given me a huge amount. And I just found it's in my nature to like to be surrounded by life and to study chimpanzees in the trees above my head and get to know them as individuals. And, some people bring to the field, like studying fossil bones, like all this stuff Homo naledi right now they're discovering in South Africa is amazing. And that actually tells us what our ancestors were really like. But chimpanzees bring it all to life in a sense that fossil bones never can.
Yeah, because you see it. You see it as in and about what they are and what ordinarily our ancestors were like and stuff like that.
Exactly.
So it was this particular class,
Dr. Wallach's class, yes,
and that just changed everything for you and just allowed you go along this particular line of thought and thinking. That's like a wonderful kind of stuff. But if we were to divert a bit, what about Tolkien? What do you find very fascinating about his work? The share, is it the journey down into them getting to look for Saruman and stuff like that?
Yes, my mom used to read to me The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings when I was a kid. And actually, I thank her for that. For just reading those books makes you want to travel to far off places, leave the sort of daily trappings of comfortable life behind and go off on adventures. And that, to me, was The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And I ended up sort of following that path myself. But it was as that book awakened in me the desire to go off on these sort of quests and live with different societies and Tolkien actually kind of created this whole world, and he put a lot of detail and thought into it, which sort of mirrors our own world. So and to me, studying chimps, sometimes do you know the Forest of Mirkwood?
Yeah.
Do you remember when the hobbits were told not to leave the trail by Gandalf? Or something bad might happen to them, but they keep seeing these wood elves in the distance, and they'll be having a big feast and dancing and making merry. Sure. And they forgot what Gandalf said. They leave the trail. The wood elves kick out their fire. Everything goes dark, leaving the dwarves and the hobbit alone in the forest. Yeah. And then they see another light somewhere far off, and it's the wood elves again. Chimps are like that. When you're studying them in the forest, you hear you hear tree drums. Yeah. By the way, and you're pulled off of your, you can't resist it. And then usually they run away or they disappear. They go off to find some other food, and you're left there in the forest. But they're great fun. I want to tell you this. One of my best favorite memories was working in the Goto forest. I was living in the town of Grima for almost a year, and we were going down into the forest and surveying for chimps and gorillas. Chimps and gorillas lived in the same forest. I would wake up in the morning to a hominid species drum concert. So from the swamps, I'd hear the chimps and gorillas, because they were kind of hiding out in the swamps from the loggers that were nearby. And the chimps, they would be they'd be drumming on trees. The gorillas would actually be drumming on their chest. Buck, 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 buck. And then to the north, you would hear another third kind of hominid species going like this. You know who they were, right?
Yeah.
Us.
So
human drums. That
so
church
it's like, yeah. So it's like a convolution of like a whole lot of stuff from we humans down there, in and about religion and all that, and then these other guys, the chimps, and then the gorillas on the other side, and then you probably waking. Is that like your alarm or something like that?
And that was my alarm for about a year there when I was lucky enough to live in a forest with both chimps and gorillas and humans living up not too far away, the people of Grima. So it was just, and just the different ways in which each species played drums. Gorillas play the drums on their chest,
And then the other guys do vocals.
Chimps do it on the trees.
On the trees.
And we cut the freaking tree down and make a drum out of it and put some kind of animal skin on it. So to me, just the different ways that these ape species make their drums or use drums is fascinating. The similarities and the differences. It's music,
Yeah, these guys get to do it without taking life.
And then
we tend to do it and call it civilization by cutting down the trees, getting the trunk out, burning it, and then probably incomplete combustion, burning the whole middle, and then we have to kill an animal to not really get the skin, to not really get entertainment for ourselves.
But to be fair enough, the people of Grima, they have a light footprint compared to, say, if you look at it as a rock concert, an arena.
Of course.
I mean, the people of Grima, I don't think. To me, also interesting is the fact that it's like the very complexity. Also, the rhythms of the human drums is boom.
Sure.
Whereas the chimp drums are more chaotic and wild. And gorillas are punk. So it's just different styles, but the same thing. I think it's all like music, and it's just different ways of creating music. Human music and non-human music, in a sense.
You had described your jungle life and all that. And what does a typical day, like a full day, look like for you in the jungle? Like from start with the alarm of probably the chimps or the gorillas and all that. Do you sleep in camps, or these camps are like pitched and you can get to dismantle them and move with them, or it's like you always return to a particular camp?
We've done both. At Beeley, for instance, we had a main camp called Camp Louis, but then we would also do long transects deep into the forest, 50 kilometers from the main road, sleeping in different bivouacs every night. So we did some of both, and that was actually really challenging, but it's what enabled us to do our counts of chimp nests, which showed the further you got away from the road, the more chimp nests there were. And I'll tell this story. We were initially trying to habituate the chimpanzees at Camp Louis, which is close to the main road where there's human villages and things like this. And so we'd wake up every morning, we'd hear pant hoots, we would track down the chimps, try to contact them. But when we make contact with the chimps, they would scream, they would jump out of the trees, they would have diarrhea, they would panic and they would run away. And we kind of realized, well, we can't really habituate these chimps, get them used to human presence, because it's DRC, it's kind of unstable, and also the chimpanzees there would be in danger if we got them used to humans. But Monsieur Ligada Fosten, he's a forest ninja. He's this amazing local Zande guy who I worked with for many years, and he would walk barefoot through the forest for 2 days with no problem, just to meet the survey party somewhere else. He would say, "I'll be a bit late, Monsieur Cleve," and he'd show up 2 days later. He just walked through the night. I mean, he's just an amazing guy. And he and his family had gone fishing out in the Gangu forest, which is like a 3-day walk from the main road. And he told me around the campfire, when we were failing to habituate the chimps close to the road, "Monsieur Cleve, you really have to go and see Gangu forest, because out there's many more chimps, and they're unafraid of humans, and they will actually approach you on the ground and look through your backpack. They're that unafraid of humans because they haven't been hunted, and at least in the lifespan of the adults." And so when things were kind of going a bit crazy at Beeley politically and all this kind of stuff, we decided we were going to do these transects. We're going to stop any attempts at habituation, and we did 3 parallel transects into this Gangu forest. Now, one of the first things that I saw when we got out there, the wildlife was suddenly not afraid of us. Huge troops of monkeys would pass over our heads and stare at us. A leopard approached us, thinking there were pigs on the other side of us. The leopard thought I was a pig and looked and stared at me and Legata like this from just a couple of meters away, realized we weren't pigs, and then sort of disappeared. Legata and me had our cameras ready, but we were so transfixed by this leopard's gaze that we couldn't film it. We were just, we froze up, and then it's too late when we pushed the button. And then the leopard went around and attacked the pigs on the other side. And indeed, when we got out into the deep Gangu forest, sleeping in bivouacs, and mainly we were counting chimp nests, but when we got a chance, we'd contact the chimps. And indeed, they were not afraid of us at all. They would stay around. I wrote a paper on this. They would stay around and peer at us. They're what we call naive chimpanzees. What that means is these chimpanzees have not been seriously hunted by humans in at least decades, maybe forever. So it was just an amazing opportunity to study. The interesting thing is some of the chimps we've seen at Chinko seem that way as well, and we're trying to figure out what that means. But what do we do in the? So in the morning, we listen for pantoots. The chimps at night will drum on trees and go, "Woo, woo, 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 woo." And so the local guys, the Izande or whoever you're working with, the Benzeli, they know how to hone in and locate where those chimps are in the morning. And you go and contact them. Sometimes you even follow the cries of hornbill birds. You know hornbills probably from where you are from. And we go to fruit trees and wait at fruit trees until the chimps come, and then you film the chimps. You can check out my YouTube channel and see some video images of some of these Bili and Chinko chimps that we filmed, and then observe their behavior. But at the same time, my main speciality is actually looking at the material culture that we find, the artifacts left by the chimps as we move through the forest.
Wow. So your day starts in and about that particular way, goes in through that. So when you're done monitoring them in the morning, probably the leaf trails down here for you to get to do your research and for you to get whatsoever. What are you looking at? Are you looking at the food they left behind? Are you looking at their food trails? Are you looking at how they slept and how they woke and probably where they go hunting? And
Indeed. So people like Jane Goodall, Christoph Busch, Toshishada Nishida, they were lucky enough and dedicated enough to be able to study chimpanzees that were actually habituated, like that you could follow them around all day. That's never what I've done. Other than at Bogoma, where I was working with a population that had been habituated by the team that was there, Kat Hobader and Thibaut Gruber. Mostly what I'm working with is chimps that you can't travel with them from nest to nest. So the best way to know about them is to study their nesting sites. Chimps make fresh nests every night to sleep in, often up in the trees, but interestingly enough at Bili, where I work, they have a culture of ground nesting. And that may actually tell us something about how our own ancestors started spending more time on the ground. We're the only fully terrestrial non-human ape. So it's very relevant. But also we study tool sites. So you find a big mound of driver ants. You know the driver ants, right? These are very aggressive. I'm sure you have them in Nigeria as well.
Sure.
We find a big mound, and we find, say, 4 sticks projecting out of the driver ant mound. And they've had the leaves ripped off of them. They've been modified. And they're sticking out of these. Those are chimpanzee tools. Now, you have to be careful. You're not just looking at a stick that fell out of the tree on the mound and count that. And so we actually, just like people study ancient hominin tools, mainly stone tools, because that's the only thing that fossilizes, we're studying very fresh hominid tools because chimpanzees like us are hominids. They're not hominins, they're hominids. Actually, some would say they're even hominins. But we're actually able to study a living hominid relative's tool use traditions, and that's what I focus on. But when we can make contact with the chimpanzees, we certainly don't hesitate to do so.
Wow, that's a whole lot down there. So if they get to drum this way at night, they definitely have to pass the night there.
So chimps, they're nomadic. We humans, we have villages, cities, towns, homes like this. Chimps actually are nomadic, so they sleep in a new nesting site pretty much every night. And they make a new fresh nest every night, which is actually a complex structure, and we're studying that right now. Sometimes even on the ground in the Bili area. And then the next night they'll go off looking for fruits or hunting monkeys somewhere, and then they'll sleep in another nesting site. Sometimes, though, in Uganda, in Bogoma, some of the local folks would call these big. There's places the chimps come back to repeatedly, and you'll find a fresh nest from tonight, and you'll find an older nest from 2 weeks ago, and another one from 6 months ago, and the local guys at Bogoma would call those areas chimpalas, like Kampala.
Kampala,
they would say this is a chimpala. It's kind of like a chimp village. So it's an interesting phenomenon. We're kind of looking at what might draw the chimps back to these nesting areas where they repeatedly make that. And then you'll find huge tracts of forest with plenty of fruit trees where the chimps are spending time, but they don't nest there. So why are they nesting in these particular areas? Is it like a little village for them, or is it some ecological reason that explains the favorite nesting trees are there or something? This is something where I'm actually entering a lot of data right now on all these nesting sites we have for years back, and we're going to be looking at some of the properties of some of these nesting sites.
So when, as nomadic as they are, do they come back ordinarily to the same track they had gone through, or they just like continue their nomadic journey in and about different places, or they they follow this trail. Like, we humans, if you're going now, let's say you're going to the airport and then you want to come back, you have this idea of getting into the plane and then you are heading down to maybe the airport in Kampala and all that, and then you find your way back still to Europe. Is that the way they get to do their stuff? Or
well, this is a colleague of mine named Caroline Janmats. She's done a lot of research in habituated populations where you can actually follow the chimps, and her work is fascinating because it shows the chimps sort of plan their routes. So, for instance, chimps are really good botanists, right? They're able to, like, if they see a certain kind of fruit that is now fruiting at this one site, in this one tree, they know, okay, it's the time of year for this kind of fruit. So they'll actually go in like a direct line to other fruiting trees of the same kind, as opposed to just randomly bumping into them. And she has some really cool research on that. So they do seem to plan their routes to some degree. But, and they'll come back to a fruiting tree repeated nights sometimes, and then sleep in different areas around that tree. But other times you'll be with the chimps one day, and then suddenly they're gone for 3 weeks. You don't even know where they are. And especially if you don't have habituated chimps, you don't know their patterns. When you go to a new site like we're doing at Chinko, you have to first figure out where their preferred areas are before you can find them, because they will vanish like the wood elves in Mirkwood. They'll vanish for a while and then come back. So they're really complicated. Like they don't have fixed like village paths and things like this as much as we do. Humans, we tend to I come back here every night and sleep. Chimps aren't like that.
Wow. So then about the where they get to find food and how they get to look at botany to a large extent determines how they get to move.
Yes, exactly. They're both botanists, and they're good sort of map makers in terms of knowing the topography of their area, knowing places to avoid. For instance, if there's predators around, knowing places where males will be looking for females that are in estrus. They actually use tree drumming and panhoots to coordinate their travels to some degree, kind of loosely. They don't all, unlike gorillas. Gorillas move around in a big group, a solid group through the forest, pretty much stable. Chimps, they're called fission-fusion social structure. And that basically means we're fission-fusion as well. So after we have our wonderful conversation, you're going to go and maybe hang out with some other friends. I'm going to spend some time with Sonia, and then tomorrow I'm going to go to Africa and meet. So we're always mixing and matching different. Gorillas aren't that way. Gorillas travel in a steady group. Chimps are like us in that way. And fission-fusion is an interesting social system because let's say there's two individuals. One is dominant to the other when they meet alone. But let's say the second individual has powerful friends, so that when I meet the second individual just alone, maybe I can dominate them. But if they come back with two of their big powerful friends, maybe I better be a little more. So we have to be political because, whereas in the gorilla group, the silverback is the kind of boss.
Sure.
And the females all respect him. And there is some politicking maybe between the females. But in terms of chimps, they don't always meet in the same combinations, and so that requires a certain kind of understanding of social complexity.
So you find between lions and the whole idea of creating territory for themselves in about the females that will be around a particular territory. You see that also in the silverbacks, and is this something you get to find in chimps also? About
well, gorillas they tend to have home ranges, but they overlap with other gorillas, so they're not very territorial.
It's not like a complete territory of like as you get to see in lions.
But with gorillas, no. But with chimps, they do have territories. We call them communities.
Territories. I'm looking about masculine territories right now. Not necessarily territories of community. Like, do you get to see this creating of territories as you get to see in a couple of other animals?
Well, as you know, with we humans, we have like imaginary borders separating nations, and oftentimes there's warfare, unfortunately, between these. Chimps have something similar, and then you'll have a community which is patrolled by males of the community. The males are all related to each other.
So not one male, like
they work as a group to patrol and even go to war with neighboring communities. This seems to be a common feature of almost all chimpanzee societies that have been studied. Males will form patrols, patrol the outskirts of their community, and if they find a lone male or a lone individual from another community, they will attack and maybe even kill them.
But if they kill and that's the end,
Sorry?
When they kill this lone chimp, that's the end about it. They allow it to decompose or down, or do they do something?
No, they don't bury, or sometimes they'll eat. There is cannibalism in
yeah. So
chimpanzees.
that is cannibalism. I was trying to like get at. Is it something like very, very common, or is it something that comes out of necessity?
Well, chimps can be. By the way, we should contrast between chimpanzees and bonobos. Bonobos are close relatives of chimps that also live in DRC. They don't seem to go to war with each other. There can be aggression within the species. And in fact, sometimes females will attack males. I've even seen this in captivity. But they don't go to war with each other. But chimpanzees share with us this unfortunate. Well, for us, it's very unfortunate because we can blow up whole forests and whole countries. But with chimpanzees, they also go to war. And one thing that happens when a patrol of a male, usually it's males, encounter, some females can be involved, but they encounter a lone male, they'll kill them and then they'll tear them up. Like they'll rip off their testicles and things like this. It can be quite brutal. And sometimes they'll even eat parts of them. So yeah, it's kind of disturbing to see, but this is Jane Goodall used to think chimpanzees represent what we should be. They're peaceful and they swing around in the trees and they eat fruits while we're polluting the planet. But then she encountered this. She observed this. This warfare between two neighboring groups. One wiped out the other, and all of a sudden she was like, "Oof, these chimps are a lot more like us than we thought."
Yeah. At what point did we go our separate ways in the evolutionary track between we chimps and bonobos?
Chimpanzees and bonobos split from each other, genetically speaking, something between 1 and 2 million years ago, I think is the figure.
Okay. Was that at the same time we also splitted from them?
No, we split from them something like 9 million years ago.
So later on after that, they did the split and then we...
Yeah, chimps and bonobos kept along the same line for another 6 or 7 million years, and they only split very recently. In fact, if you look at it's kind of hard to distinguish between a chimp and a bonobo. Obviously, we humans look quite different. there's no we walk on 2 legs. We have these giant brains. Sure. Bonobos and chimps look really similar to each other. Yeah. There are subtle differences. Bonobos, for instance, chimps are born with white faces and they turn black as they grow older. Bonobos are black from the start. They have ruby red lips. They have pink around their lips and their eyelids. They're actually quite pretty, and they have these parted hair in the middle. But see, that's a very subtle difference. Chimps and bonobos, you could easily mistake one for the other, whereas we humans, and even a gorilla looks quite different from a chimp, right? So the more evolutionary time that passes, the more divergent two populations will become. Chimps and bonobos still, they drum on trees. They both use tools quite well in captivity, although bonobos, for some reason, don't use a lot of tools in the wild. We don't know why. It's one of the big mysteries that we're looking at.
So it's a whole lot of stuff to ordinarily get to look at and get to study down there. What about safety?
Safety in the field?
Of researchers in the field. And
well, that's part of the fun of it. I mean, people worry about me when I go to Africa, and I understand why. There are hippos that walk by our campsite every night, and the crocodiles in the river, and elephants can be a little unpredictable. But I always worry about like people driving along the highway here in the USA, talking on their cell phone. Like that's a danger I won't have when I'm in the forest. I have to take medicine against malaria. As you well know, there's all these tropical diseases that can be damaging. But sometimes people I think worry a lot about these field trips because they don't know that they don't they're unfamiliar dangers, which can be more frightening. But there are also dangers here. COVID, for instance, the whole world was infected with a pandemic. So it's not. There's this image of Africa as like the heart of darkness, which I want to challenge that because Joseph Conrad, Polish, by the way.
Yeah.
He meant the heart of darkness not to represent Africa, but how colonialists were acting in Africa, how white people were coming in and killing Africans. He didn't mean that Africa itself was the heart of darkness, but it's often misinterpreted as, oh, what is it like to travel into the heart of darkness? No, I like to call tropical Africa the heart of light. Because to me, it's just so full of color and community and diversity and even human cultural diversity. And it's just a beautiful place. So yes, it's dangerous, but I think we should have a little danger in this world. It shouldn't all be, so neat and orderly. That in itself is a danger.
Of course. And it's something many persons don't get to really look at, particularly Conrad, as you talked about. I'm working on a couple of stuff, like I told you the last time, about his life and the books he's written down there. I'm shooting also in the district that is the street named after him. In Poland, it's Josepha Conrada, so it's like Polish, so it's like the avenue I get to use in like running the documentary and all that. So it's trying to capture Heart of Darkness for what it is from the European perspective, from the depiction of Africa and the people down there, and the conversations from Chinua Achebe and in and about these persons down there. What about Sonia? How does she manage the idea of you being in the jungle? You told a story off camera about how you guys had a conversation that was not transmitted properly, and then she became a bit scared.
Well, what I would say is Sonia is also a field researcher, and she studies a culture in Colombia, the Colombia coffee culture. And so she's used to field work, and in fact, that's part of what drew us to each other. Is we both love to work in the field and meet the people that were, that live in these cultural systems. So, it's just really great to have that my wife also is a field researcher and understands the situations. Although sometimes I can do it wrong. At the Chinko site, for instance, the internet cuts off at about 9.
Okay.
That's actually the main base Kosho in the field. We don't even have any internet whatsoever. We're totally remote. But there was one time I was actually sketching some hyenas around the base camp, and I forgot that the power goes out at 9. So I was telling Sonia, "Hey, I'm surrounded by hyenas right now, and I'm going to draw them." And I was going to send her a drawing of the hyena. I tried to mention the fact that there was a barricade, but apparently that message didn't go through, that I was safe. She didn't get that. So, and then all of a sudden the power went out, and so the last thing she heard was, "I'm surrounded by hyenas." I didn't get through the message that there was a barricade in between myself and the hyenas, so I was actually safe. And so she spent the entire night like, "Oh no, what happened to my husband? The phone went dead, and he was surrounded by hyenas." So, I hopefully learned a bit from that one and make sure I communicate a little better. But then when we get to the deepest part of the farce, there's no message whatsoever. There's no internet whatsoever. The best I can do is send a message out through a GPS to Sonia, and then Sonia informs the rest of the world, including you, that I'm fine, and she can send a message back. So you have to get used to very remote sort of conditions.
So it's more or less like the kind of way telegraphs used to work then, whereby you send it through wire and then it gets to a middleman. Does it get to a middleman before it gets to Sonia, or the GPS just sends it directly to Sonia?
There's this wonderful fellow who works with African parks named Primates, and he will get the message from one of the echoes, who are the Central African wildlife guides that we work with at Chinko. And Primates will send a message to Sonia. Both of them speak both in English and French, so they can communicate either way. And then Sonia will send a message back. And sometimes, like if Primates visits the site, I can even take a picture of myself or even a note that I've written to Sonia and send back. But it's a long time to be away from, not just my wife, but also everyone else that I care about. And so that's one of the difficult parts of field research is isolating yourself from the people that you care about, and it takes some getting used to.
Yeah, you find yourself doing sketches also. Was it something you learned while in the jungle, or something you've had from?
My mom has pictures of me when I was like 2 or 3 years old. On a little baby on the floor drawing dinosaurs. I'd always start with the dinosaur tail and finish with the head for some reason, and the floor would be just covered with my drawings. And I've always drawn. And what I like to do now is to sketch people and non-humans and plants that I see on my travels, and I post them every day on you can look at them on my Facebook page or on social media, Instagram. But also I've written a children's book called A Rhino to the Rescue, which is basically about a civilized rhinoceros who goes off into the wild places to see what's happening to his rhino cousins, and working together, he decides, okay, I need to protect help to save wild rhinoceroses. And he works together with like-minded people around the world, in Africa and Asia and Europe, to help to protect wild rhinos. But he also learns something from the wild rhinoceroses, how to charge, how to be a real rhino in a sense. So that rhino is me going to visit my closest cousins, the chimps. And, I don't think they've learned much from me, because they generally kind of avoid me, but I learned a lot from them. So I'm kind of Ernest Horningway, who is the character that I invented. So yeah, I love art. Art is a way for me. Sometimes the world seems very dark and very troubling, and a lot of war and a lot of destruction of nature. And with art, I can create my own version of reality. And that, I don't know, it's like therapy for me.
Well, it's a whole lot to get to see your sketches. I've looked at a whole lot of the stuff you've done down there.
I need to do one of you.
Okay, I'll be very glad to see that you do one of me. And I've seen the one you did for Pavel and Hector and a couple of other persons down there. And it's so much like them, and they're just
Thank
like
you.
sketches without paints and all that, and they look so much like them down there.
Thank you.
Do you get to substitute that in the forest when you don't have, let's say, if you're not with your camera, you get to sketch this?
I'm taking art books with me now. So, in fact, I've usually when I'm with the chimpanzees, I'm actually taking data on them, so I can't actually draw them. But I do draw things. I'll sit in the morning sometimes. I have a little place called the Perch, which is something like what Jane Goodall used to do. She would sit on the side of on the top of a hill and listen and watch for the chimps. I would do the same thing at Chinko and listen for chimp panthoots to know where to go and find them. And while I'm there, I'll sketch things like duikers and things like baboons that pass by. And I do get to do some. You can look on my Facebook page. I have a whole album called Chinko, and you can check out my drawings.
It's very fascinating how you're able to be with these guys and then function so well with them, and then they get to look at the way you get to do things. But just a question I wanted to ask earlier, when you talk about this thing, chimpanzees that are habituated, what do you mean? Are they like restricted within a particular region, or they get to walk around free range but still restricted by barbed wires or whatsoever?
No, it's not that. Habituation refers to people like Jane Goodall or Christoph Busch or others, Toshisada Nishida, spent years getting the chimps used to human presence, to researchers' presence, so that then they can be followed every day and you can watch all the little details of their social lives, which is amazing. And I love that. I haven't been able to habituate any chimps for the reasons I explained. But habituation takes years of hard work. You have to follow the chimps from morning to night and then get back to camp through a forest full of elephants and things like that. So it's a challenge. And it basically means just spending time with the chimps until they stop like reacting to you and just get bored with you, and you become just like an antelope for them, like, oh, humans again. But if you want to do that, you have to be careful that there's no hunting of the chimps going on, because if you get chimps used to human presence and then you have to leave or hunters come in, the chimps are sitting ducks, and this is an ethical thing you have to really keep in mind.
Oh, okay. So when you get them habituated, you also have to make sure that they're still protected one way or the other, because if you get to leave, other presents get to come in, they don't feel this urge to ordinarily react because they feel humans are still in and about part of their society now, and then it becomes an easy way to get to hunt them.
Exactly. And that's why we abandoned our efforts to habituate the Bealy chimps, because we couldn't really protect them. It was kind of an unstable time in DRC. Unfortunately, poor DRC is suffering so much, and even now it's back to warfare. And I love DRC so much, and it just breaks my heart to see what's happening there. It's tragic.
Did you research anywhere close to Goma, something like that?
I haven't. I've been there to a sanctuary called Luiro. By the way, if you want to help protect chimpanzees, go check out the site of Luiro Primates. I'm sure they would probably need your help now, especially given the instability in eastern DRC. But I sent 5 chimpanzee orphans that we confiscated in the Akedi Buta region to Luiro, and Luiro provides a really good home for the chimps. It also provides employment for Congolese. And unfortunately, they're in this area right now of eastern DRC. It's very unstable. So actually, you can really help chimps, including chimps that I have helped to rescue, by supporting Luiro Sanctuary. Look it up, LWIRO.
And so
I haven't worked there, but the chimps that I rescued have gone there.
So when you say support and help, what do you in what way? In kind or in cash?
Well, you can. They probably have openings for. You'd have to check if they have openings for volunteers.
Okay.
But certainly with cash, the chimps eat a huge amount of food every day: lettuce and vegetables, and also the salaries for the local people. It's a really good project and really worth. If you want to do something to actually help chimps and also people in DRC, Luiro is a great place. There are other sanctuaries as well. One's called Jack. But I think this is great because it also gives employment for local people that is helping wildlife.
If someone is listening to us and needs to take something away, people have been making these arguments that, there needs to be development in regions like that. I know there have been conversations about, before now we have been hunting around this area, and then people don't really want to grow food for themselves or animals, rare animals for themselves, and they want to go hunting the way they claim their fathers and their ancestors did. What have been the relationship like between people who have this view, probably local hunters in neighboring villages, encroachment of civilization, so to say, as we have it now, building of houses and roads and all that, in projects like the ones you do?
Well, that's a great question and a difficult question. I mean, I'm a vegan, so I made the choice not to include any kind of animal products in my diet. But I don't think I'm going to convert all the hunter-gatherers and all the people in Central Africa to vegans. That's not my goal, or And I realize that their lifestyle depends on fishing and hunting and all these kind of things. We can distinguish between hunting to feed local populations, which has been going on for tens of thousands of years, and they're still chimps, they're still elephants. Obviously, it didn't wipe them all out. And this kind of new,
commercialization,
where you have logging companies, often funded by European or American dollars, that go, or mining companies. Maybe the money comes from China. I mean, we're all a part of this. That goes into pristine forests, cuts roads in, and then the meat is shipped out to big cities. Now, we can't condemn people in big cities for eating chimps or gorillas because, hey, look at the United States. Look how much how many cows we're eating, how many fish we're eating. This is a global problem. It's not something to target any particular. But I think it really should be distinguished between local consumption but even with local consumption, if people don't eat chimps, no one's going to starve. Chimps are very rare animals. People can eat duikers, people can eat pigs, things like this, even monkeys that are not protected and that can replenish themselves. But chimps, I would say, for instance, DRC, pretty soon they may have the largest population of chimps left on the planet. They may already have that. That is something that DRC can offer to the world. It's something to be proud of. And the Congolese have managed to, chimps have survived in Congo. We wiped out our buffaloes in the United States. That's something to be proud of. It gives a sense of national identity. The okapi in DRC, it's only found in DRC. What a great symbol for the country, for instance. So these are things that, there are certain species that are protected and, are worth spreading the message that these things are worth more alive than dead. These beings are worth more alive than dead. That doesn't mean that people aren't going to eat duikers or fish, but if commercialized hunting goes in and wipes out the local fauna, soon the local people won't have any duikers to eat either. It'll all be gone. In fact, we'll have the Sahara Desert moving down into these former tropical wonderlands. So it's in the interests of the world to protect these areas. And it's also in the interest of local people. Forest, when rain falls, the rain trickles down through the forest and ends up going into the fields of the local people. And so if you cut the forest down, the rain is just going to destroy the earth really quickly, the hard rain of the tropics, and the crops won't grow. It's all a system, a beautifully intricate system that I would actually argue Africans have done better job in that than almost anyone else in the world, except maybe in Southeast Asia and the Amazon, of protecting these natural treasures for millennia. My people, we wiped out what we found. So I would actually say that this is something Africa can be proud of.
Yeah. It's just like when you mention, I want to go safari. So it's like Kenya comes to mind because it's in and about what has been left down there. And when you talk about your work, you get to talk about Congo and you get to talk about Zimbabwe and a couple of other countries down there. The Pope is dead now. Pope Francis, God rest his soul. He was buried yesterday. He was
a man of peace.
A man of peace indeed. He was a big fan of ecology and the protection of the climate and all that. And he wrote Fratelli Tutti and he wrote a couple of other encyclicals and documents that talks about not just migrants, but protection of the environment and all that. Young people growing up who've been taught and told money is everything. How should they get to look at life that trees ordinarily deserve to be in and about our environment? Because without them, we can't function because we get our own oxygen from them and we get to give them one way or the other. And just like George Orwell gets to talk about in Animal Farm, we give so little to animals and we take so much from them, and we don't really think about that.
Such a disturbing civilization we live in. I'm very attracted to this idea. I think it started in Ecuador of granting rights to, say, river systems. We grant we give rights to corporations, which
Yeah.
I don't understand because that's not an actual person.
Sure.
Obviously, human rights need to be defended around the world, but why not give rights to river systems, communities of life? And a lot of indigenous already have this kind of mentality, this kind of, the sacred is found in nature, not somewhere out in outer space or up in heaven. It's all around us. Spirits live in the forest, and I think our society, our Western society in particular, has lost that image of the holy found inside the actual world that we're surrounded with. And I think we're seeing the results of that. Everything is commodified really quickly. And by the way, this disease spreads. In my mind, it's a disease of rampant capitalism into the heads of everyone in the planet, and pretty soon we're going to be living on something like the planet Mars, which is not really sustainable for life. And what do we live on then?
It's very interesting because I grew up in the part of Nigeria. Pretty much the first 10 years of my life is called Buki. They have the Afi Wildlife Sanctuary around that area. It's close to Cameroon, and then we also have the Buancho Reserve. So it's like there's a canopy walk. You get to see wildlife living in their region. And the guy that brought me up into the world of reading and the world of curiosity is worthy to mention. His name is Mark Inyotu. He's now dead.
Mark Inyoto?
Mark Inyotu. So,
okay, please send me a link to his work.
Yeah, I was saying, but he's dead now. But he was the first person to grant me access to his library in the community where I was like a young boy, and he was like,
"Oh wow,
I see your life in and about out of this region. Be focused, stay focused, come pick books as much as you want from my place." And he normally display this wildlife stuff back then in the streets of Panya for people to get to watch. And over the years, I got so much out of what he granted me access to, books and different stuff like that. And then I saw women and men go into the forest. And I kept on asking myself, what were they really looking out for there? Because, like you've pointed out in all our conversations, the idea of commercializing everything is so much and is so strong that sometimes we forget that, we haven't been in control so much of the stuff that happened around. And I think like COVID really points out to the situations we find ourselves, because we are so fragile and yet we claim to be so strong. And Mark Inyotu pointed out this to me early enough in life, and he really worked so hard in preserving a whole lot of stuff. And now he's dead. I know there are a whole lot of persons out there, and I've forgotten the name. I think his name was Gorilla, actually. Normally
his nickname.
Yeah, in wildlife conservation, you get to pick a nickname, and then I think, was I Flamingo or something? I can't remember, but he told us to pick names, and then I picked, I think, Flamingo or something and about this, and then
So he had a little group of people that he would talk to, or students, or
he came to our secondary school then, and then he advised us to get into this wildlife conservative society, and then we nicknamed ourselves different stuff, because my mom comes from this particular region in Nigeria where there's so much trees, but funny enough and sadly also, the youth have been told to go into deforestation, and deforestation brings about quick money.
Yeah.
But then it takes years and years to grow back these trees. And there's the plant a tree that when you cut down a tree, you replace. But they don't do this because they think the forest is always going to be there. But it doesn't work like that, and we should be looking at alternative measures to go about this. So,
sounds like a very wise man.
Yeah. Sebaba was his name. His nickname also was Sebaba, and then he was like, it's like Sebaba, so like Se Baba. You call him Baba and stuff like that. So unfortunately, he died, and here we are. What are we looking out for in the future for chimps, for wildlife, and all that? What are your visions for the world as we wrap up?
That's great. I'm lucky enough to be working with African parks, or have been invited in by African parks who are doing amazing things in this Chinko Natural Reserve. Yeah. There's so many amazing species living there, and the chimps are doing some really interesting things. You'll be hearing about that soon. Maybe we'll do another talk if you like.
Sure.
When I'm ready to release the results of what we found.
Yeah. I'll be glad to get to do that.
And a large population of chimps, and there's there's a lot of Central Africans working together with expatriates on this project. So it's a good way for international collaboration as well. I'm very excited to be a part of this, and I'm really looking forward to going back to Chinko in a couple of days. But I'm also very glad we got to talk.
Do you miss the jungle?
I always miss it, yeah, but it's always inside me in a sense. But another thing, I think it's important to not only depend on the jungle, on the rainforest to give you meaning. Look at the meaning around. There's birds in my backyard here. I quite like living here. I mean, I love living here. There's wolves, there's bison, there's all sorts of things. And so it's like I don't think we should depend on some far off wild place to appreciate life. It's all around us here, wherever you are.
Definitely. It's the message out there is, preserve the ecosystem, and we can coexist. We can walk in and about this, and children should grow up coming to know what a river looks like. Children should grow up coming to know what birds, and we didn't get the time to talk about dinosaurs, and now they're in and about extinct. We know it wasn't a complete fault of us, and other stuff happened that ordinarily saw to it that they get to be extinct. Maybe next time. I know you're
Don't get me started talking about dinosaurs. It'll go on another 5 hours.
I know you like dinosaurs a whole lot, and I remember you won the contest at the bar the other time talking about
the pub quiz. Fortunately, dinosaurs for two pub quiz sessions, and I happened to be there. And everything else I don't know much about, but dinosaurs I did okay.
And then people were like, "What's happening here?" And the guy was like hitting everything. And so, Cliff, it's been wonderful talking to you.
Talking to you too, my friend.
And I would love to talk to you more about this. We'll hope that your research comes out well, and in and about what you've done for like three decades now should ordinarily pay off. And then we're looking out for more stuff. And Sonia, thank you for allowing me to talk to your husband this long. And
yeah, she's helping to pack for tomorrow, so we need to get back onto that. But I really enjoyed this conversation, and it's very important. I think that I've been able to express things I haven't been able to express in other forums before. So thank you for this opportunity.
I really appreciate the work you get to do down there. It's very fascinating, and this is a conversation we've been meaning to have for a very long time. And I needed to go through most of your works, and I cannot claim I've exhausted everything you've put out there because they're like so exhaustive, scientific to a large extent, but to a layman like me who just tries to be so curious, I've enjoyed going through your work, and I've enjoyed going through the stuff you've put out there, and I hope we get to have this more.
Thank you, Obina.
Thank you.
Definitely.
And, I've been talking to Cliff. Cliff, from the very beginning of our conversation, is a primatologist. He's an American. We made sure we didn't go into the tariffs and conversations in and about that. And Cliff is a very amazing professor, one you ordinarily want to be around, listen to, get to learn a whole lot from. Time constraint and all that, we just have to do with what we have to do. 1 hour, 30 minutes down here. And I'm here in his house, down here, away from... We can still stay away from civilization to a large extent because there are no police sirens blowing up in and about this. It's a very quiet neighborhood down here. And we've been talking about primates, particularly down to chimps. We've looked at different evolutionary traits down there. Probably next time we'll have time to talk about dinosaurs, and we'll have time also to talk about George Orwell a bit. And Sonia will have a bit of time also to talk about politics, and that would be a good thing to do. I know you don't really like us.
Yeah, Sonia has quite a story to tell as well.
Yeah, she does, and she also will be coming down here. We'll be having some conversations. She's a field researcher, and to a large extent, she's a philosopher, and all that. And in and about that is what we have for you today. And Cliff, thank you again for allowing me to get to talk to you and allowing us to get to share your experience with a broader audience. This is Boring Conversations. It's everything but boring. I promise you that. And if you've listened to this particular point, you discover that the conversation has not been boring. The title is just a sarcastic way to talk about the things people don't want to talk about. And one of the things people don't really want to care about so much is the conversations about conserving our environment, because we think we are the best people out there. But we are not really the best guys.
Humility, folks. Yeah, exactly.
Humility is the watchword. And with that, we say see you next time. And
a biento.
Adios.
Adios. Amigos.
À la prochaine.
À la prochaine.
Yeah, in French. So yeah, I pick little languages in and about there. And in Spanish, you get to say "Tu hablas español?"
Ya, está bien. Estás aprendiendo. Sí, poco a poco.
Okay, so in and about that, we see you next time.
Ciao.
Ciao, ciao, ciao. Do widzenia.
Do widzenia.
See you next time.